All right, Smith, it's a programming language. You can program stuff with it. It compiles to JavaScript, and you can do everything JavaScript has with JavaScript literals. I'm just hoping this is neater.
Page down.
So here's why we would have a language, because humans have to think based on what we see. If we see something different, we're going to think more clearly or more convolutedly, and we don't want what's on the bottom here. So the main question of any language is, what's the common feature? In the case of a programming language, you really can't answer that. But what I decided was common was things and things that do things. And you'll see that soon. This is what I don't want. This is more like what I want. This is what I might want, but it's not anything like this. It's linear format. Okay, this is the actual language. At the top, we're defining a private method. That's what the minus is for. We're giving it a name, or a documentation, which just passes in a string to this method, which affects the method itself. So we're docking the method. And then inside the method, we subtract 1 from myself. Factorial is more complicated. Let's skip over all this metadata, which is the green stuff. We define a local variable, base case, which is whether we are less than 2. If this is true, then we return 1. Otherwise, we return ourself times our decrements factorial. I'll go into all of this in more detail soon. So the common things I chose are objects, types are also objects, methods are also objects, and objects usually reference themselves and have private variables, unlike in JavaScript. So there are both local variables and methods, and they look the same way, but the program knows whether something is local or if it's a method. So if you say A, if you've defined a local variable A, then it just compiles to A. But if you haven't defined a local variable, you don't get to access it global, it's this.A. And if you say AB, then there's 4 different forms. If A is a local, then it calls A.of, which is a special method without a name. So if you said 3, 4, you could define that to be multiplication. I don't think you should, but you could. And there's also array3, the third element in the array, or map of some value. ABC has 8 ways. Okay, if you want to create a method, you indent your code. And now instead of being called immediately, it wraps it in a function. So this is the most common way. You get a hidden variable, which is this, which unlike in JavaScript, it works more like in Ruby, if any of you have used that. So in JavaScript, have you ever had to use the pattern var self equals this? You don't have to do that anymore. So every time you create a function, it attaches this, but it has the option to unattach it. So it does it both ways. And if you've used CoffeeScript, it does both the single arrow and the double arrow. Here is a function with explicit arguments, takes an y and returns z. It is a special variable, which, yeah, screw it, it's fine. Anyway, it is an implicit argument. So you get 2 implicit arguments. The first is this, the second is it. There are some short forms, underscore its method, like underscore plus. You could say array.fold underscore plus to get the sum of it. My method underscore is a func which tells me to do that method. Val.method underscore is a func around the value doing that method. So 123.map 3.plus underscore would be 4, 5, 6. But the local variable is just a dot, then a space. I could have called it val, but I figure it's common enough that you should remember that a dot means local variable. Local function is pretty much the same way. You get multi-line string literals, and if you use a double quote, you get to do interpolation. And you get the usual literals that you would expect, also JavaScript literals. So what we didn't include in the language is you don't get to directly access properties. Everything is a method. You don't get to directly add new properties. You can do both of these things through methods. There are no keywords except for use and dot. You don't get globals because it all automatically goes to this dot something. So if you want to access a global, you have to use a JavaScript literal or wrap that in a module and use a module instead. You don't get all these control structures. You have to do everything through functions. You don't get object literals. There could be metaprogramming or wrapper, but they're probably not necessary. And you can pass CoffeeScript files through the compiler. So the Smith compiler is currently written in CoffeeScript, which technically means it can compile itself because it can also compile CoffeeScript. Instead of prototypes, we have regular old types, much like in Ruby. There was a bit of work getting this to work with the JavaScript type system. It has a different way of calling things than JavaScript does, but mostly it works. And if you create your types in Smith, they'll be just as fast as JavaScript stuff. It uses the new Harmony feature of proxies. You can have multiple parents for a type. You can't have multiple parents for an object. Since we're not a prototype-based system, we do recognize a distinction between a normal object. There's a difference between an object to type relationship and a type to supertype relationship, which isn't something you get in JavaScript. The module system is currently common JS modules. I hope it'll be the Harmony ones someday. It doesn't really matter unless you're using lazy modules, but I won't get into that today. Anyway, you work the same way as you do in Harmony. Every file is a module, and you use the use keyword to get imports. It's all based on the file system. When you have a module, you're automatically dropped into a type. So if you call something vec.smith, then you're automatically in a new type called vec, and you get to define stuff for that type. I've already told you about meta. It calls it on the method itself upon its creation, which allows you to add stuff onto the method or modify the method. So you can also do memoize. Constructors are not done yet, but since I don't have it as a language feature, it has to be a library, and you can do it like that. Future, I'm going to make some project, hopefully by June, that will show up the language. Any questions?
Is this rich text, is that important to the language, or is that just?
No, this is just regular syntax highlighting.
Okay. I've never seen things.
No questions?